Un jour je serai de retour près de toi. Cindy's Message. Disco Elysium. The Daily Grind, Chapter 207. 12 hours later, well after the sun had abandoned the September evening, but before it was so absurdly late that everyone had gone home, James sat on one side of a desk in the gathering warehouse, fiddling with a magic item and helping Liz find stuff in the stacks of documents on the surface between them. They weren't monstrous stacks, not like you'd see in a movie that was trying to drive home the point that this was business, damn it. But there were still enough folders full of reports that they blanketed the desk in a labeled manila formation. Heck, James said, as the blue orb he was holding popped, giving him a skill rank in toboggan and cleaning his fridge. What fridge? He muttered, puzzling over the alien information as it ran across his thoughts. Oh, whatever, he grumbled, reaching for another orb and picking up the status quo glove again. He was trying, and failing, to create a magic item from a different flavor of magic item. The left-handed glove wasn't a status quo original. For whatever reason, probably all the blood magic involved in their creation, those ones started out a lot more powerful, and also leveled up a lot slower. This one was a duplicate, the process the Order used to make it stripping away all of its accumulated power, setting it back to level 1, but also making a much more efficient long-term piece of equipment. Right now it had two abilities stored in it, Break Wood at level 5 and Shatter Stone at level 1, each one accumulating a single charge of use roughly every 2 days. It was only where it was because of a vigilant use of dungeon time dilation. It was also one of the less valuable status quo items they owned, duplicate or not, and so it was okay for James to risk blowing it up or turning it into sand or whatever else he might screw up while attempting to infuse it with magic from a completely different dungeon. Assuming the glove even came from a dungeon in the first place. Heck! James barked out in shock as his hand slipped and he broke the other blue orb, this time not even failing the magic, just simple physical error. This one netted him a skill rank in the history of the Mexican auto industry, which was depressing, and solved the problem of making sure his delivery wasn't lost. Was it lost? He asked the air. Or does this... What did I even order? He trailed off, trying to remember. Either way, it was probably a net good. He didn't want his delivery to be lost, so he carefully picked up another blue orb and set back to the task. The status quo items held abilities that generated charges that could be used by anyone using the item. Those abilities then leveled up and unlocked new abilities, and what James wanted to do, what a lot of people wanted to do really, was to use the blue orbs that they used to make their own magic to add a new ability. Something that used the same structure of power as the status quo item, but that they had a hand in. No pun intended. It hadn't worked on any other item so far. They had a few people who were getting good at making dungeon tech, but no one could make anything even remotely like the status quo gear. For now, it was unique. But if it didn't have to be, if they could just expand even one piece of it a little bit, then every future copy of that item would be stronger and more useful. Forever. It was the kind of legacy building James normally didn't think much about, but then he planned to be around for a long time, and as somebody who averaged about one level up in his basketball lesson every year, he felt comfortable making magic items that would really come into their own 2 decades from now. He ignored Liz glaring at him over the folder she flipped down before she pulled it back up and tried in vain to get the papers to line up properly. The teenager had been here for 2 hours, and James, who was making magic items, was already close to restless. She was reading after-action reports. He could not imagine being a human with that level of focus. When James was a teenager, he literally could not focus on something for more than 20 minutes at a time, unless it was trying to find physics exploits with the plasma grenades in Halo 2, so this was relentlessly impressive to him. The least he could do, while Liz was working, was try again on the magic item creation. There were a few things the Order had started to learn about making dungeon tech. First, you needed to think like a tabletop RPG GM. This was not really hyperbole. This was almost literally true. People who had run tabletop RPGs, especially who had at some point had to deal with players who thought game balance was for suckers, just did a better job. You needed to be in that headspace of creating a set of conditions that were limiting while still useful. Which led to the second trick. You couldn't be focused on making something that solved your problem. Or rather, you could, but it was fighting an uphill battle, and it led to quirks in items. And third was weird. Third was that there seemed to be a sort of economy of vibes to the way things were made. Working with office supplies took less than working with industrial tools. Working with professional dress clothing was easier than working with something like a hoodie. And more than that, making things that felt right for what you were enchanting was easier too. You could, in theory, make glasses that changed the font of whatever you read and a pencil that let you write in infrared, but it would be so much easier to do it the other way around. And you could surpass those limits, but it took larger and larger blue orbs. Larger yellow orbs as a power supply, too. And you could not stack multiple blues in a single object. With all that in mind, James tried to just let his creative thoughts flow to something that felt like it fit. He knew pretty clearly that trying to enchant a new ability into the glove that looked like the original powers was pushing it, but he had a fairly large blue orb here to compensate, so he just let his mind wander. Since his last 4 direct efforts had resulted in broken orbs, weird skill ranks, and slightly fewer chores to do later. What did a glove do? Well, it held things. Or rather, the hand did. The glove wrapped around a hand. It protected. But professional dress wasn't for protection, it was for style, a kind of social protection. And the blue orbs did seem to like their professional twists on things, even if they were sometimes sarcastic about it. James smirked as he had an image in his head of an author, or maybe a secretary, writing with a feather pen with a single glove on their hand. Something that probably never existed, really, but a nice image. What would that look like as a power? Something that made a pen? No, that was silly, and also not especially useful at all, but the part of his brain that was always fielding questions on game balance kicked into gear as he had the thought. A power related to pens. What could it do? Make a pen better? Maybe. Make a pen a weapon? No. Sharpen a pencil. Sure, all writing implements, but only for writing. He didn't even notice when the orb he was holding silently shattered into glittering dust, which was pulled into the glove that he was holding. At a certain point, he had created an idea coherent enough and fitting enough that it just worked. And that was it. One new imbued magic item. One new category of magic item. Heck! He burst out, throwing his chair backward as he jolted to his feet. Yes! Liz thwapped the folder she was flipping through onto the desk, unaware of the breakthrough that had just occurred in front of her. You asked me to do this. Can you please stop being so distracting? She said, with the conviction only a teenager could muster. Sorry, James grinned, not really feeling the apology. I got the thing to work. Great. Liz stared at him blankly, until she awkwardly looked down. Oh. Sorry. Great? Now you're fine. James's smile softened. How's it going? Do you want to take a break? Or, go home? It's kind of late, isn't it? It's only 8. My mom's doing a class tonight. I was going to be hanging out here anyway. Momo's busy, though. Morgan's asleep, and I like being useful. She looked at James, and then glanced away, shrugging. I guess. He set the glove on the desk between them. It's okay to like being useful, he said. But it's not required, you know? You're kind of in a special position when it comes to this particular task, but we live without you, and you don't need to feel pressured on it. No. She seemed startled by her own instant vehement reply. No, I mean, it's okay. I don't mind. Liz looked around the room, seeing the only other people in it were 40 feet away and working on what looked like a suit of Cameronda armor. She looked like she had a lot to say, but didn't know where to start. She did have a lot to say. She wanted to tell James that he brought her mom back from the dead, that he saved her life, that he broke her out of a doom spiral and made her sane again. But while Liz was smart, she was still a high school senior, and she didn't exactly have the words to say it. Or the gumption. Didn't know where to find purchase to slip that into conversation casually. I want to be useful, she said, with a tilt of her head instead. James heard a lot of the blank space where things weren't said, even if he didn't know exactly what she was holding back. Well, I appreciate it, he told her reassuringly. And you can go at your own speed here. Got any notes so far? The notes in question were any discrepancies with reality. Liz wasn't exactly a brilliant tactical mind, or the brains behind the curtain, but she was entirely, naturally, immune to anti-memetics. Forced forgetfulness, information erasure, behavioral restrictions, it just didn't work on her. No one knew why, not even Planner, who lived partially in Liz's head by invitation. But as a result of it, she was the perfect person to take a look at the Order's write-up of events and check to make sure no one had ever been compromised. There was a response thing about them rescuing 40 cats? She half asked, looking at her notepad. Was that a real thing? That was a real thing, James confirmed. We took them to a local no-kill shelter. They're fine. Oh, I just thought because there's no cats around here. She waved a hand around the warehouse. James nodded. I getcha. Good thing to check, really. Also, it is weird there are no cats. I thought for sure at least one camera condo wanted a pet cat. He trailed off. I thought for sure Sarah had a pet cat. I'll check on that later. Anyway, got anything else? There's a lot of these. The words were somewhere between a defense and an excuse, as Liz realized that maybe one person was the wrong scale of team to read over the reports generated by 100 researchers, responders, and delvers over the course of months. Her eyes held a note of distress as she looked at the table full of documents. I don't even know where to start. But, does anyone ever follow up on anything here? That is the point of this. James tilted his head at her. Why, find something there? Well, there's a recent thing about animal orbs, and it seems like no one's doing anything with that. Is it a Pokemon thing, or something? James sighed in relief. Oh, no, we're prioritizing other things to copy for a little bit, and since some people incidentally picked up the orbs, we're waiting to dig into them until we have a little more to go on, which we'll probably find out also incidentally. It's not a great system, but research is very busy, and we need more people. Oh, okay. Liz sounded almost disappointed. What do the animal orbs do? No idea, James said to her as he turned in his seat, having spotted Dave walking past and giving a small wave. Though I actually see someone who I've been trying to find to ask about this who doesn't answer his messages. He raised his voice to call Dave over to them before the other man could make it to the access ladder to the roof. Dave almost gracefully curved his walking path to drop by the table they were at, stepping out of the shadows of the mostly unlit back area and into the pool of lamplight around their working space. Sup? He asked James. Also, hi Liz. Dave, you work at an animal thing, right? Can you bring me a hedgehog? James asked him directly. With a shrug, Dave easily answered. Probably not, but I can try. Why, trying to put together a Dr. Robotnik cosplay? James changed his mind about asking questions, making a shooing motion at his friend. Get out of here. Liz has work to do. After Dave had sauntered away, laughing to himself a little too loudly, Liz looked up at James from what she'd been trying to read. What's a Robotnik? You'll understand when you're older, he said rapidly. The teenager gave him a belligerent look. Really? I mean, maybe? James shrugged as he leaned back and gave a real answer to the question. That's the thing that adults say a lot. My parents used to tell me that. It was really frustrating. I think it's shorthand for there is a lot of cultural context here, and you might get it when you have had time to read and watch more movies and books and things. But I also just don't want to explain Sonic the Hedgehog lore to you right now. You know? Your parents said all that? Liz asked him, baffled. No, I'm saying that. Sort of. Anyway, sorry, I think I cut you off yelling at Dave. Did you have another one of these? She pulled a stack of now unsorted papers from the side of the desk, getting a wince from James as he realized they weren't copies. Okay, what's up with all the dungeons you guys don't use? What do you mean? Well, there's no exploration logs for Clutter Ascent, right? Oh, James sighed again. That's because people live there. We're not treating that one like a dungeon. Wait, you said all the... Are there... Wherever that stuff came from. Liz pointed to the glove on the table. Dead, as far as we know. And whatever's in Utah? Alchemists? James raised his eyebrow at her. Also mostly dead. No, like the dungeon in Utah. They were those kids, right? Morgan and Culler and I hang out with them. The one whose friend died and lives here now. She stopped and frowned. Wait. James nodded knowingly. He recognized the look on her face from saying novel sentences. Then the understanding look slipped from his face as his brain caught up. Wait, yeah, hang on. I remember this. We sent them home, informed their parents, told them no more delving until they were older. Liz looked at him like she was either hoping or worried that he knew something she didn't. And? And what? And why did you do that? She squeaked out. Because that seems stupid? As soon as she finished speaking, for a brief second, that was actually several seconds, James felt a rush of uncomfortable anger, tinged slightly with shame. Who in the fuck, his brain told him, was this kid to tell him that he was stupid? Liz watched as his face shifted instantly to a scowl in her direction, the atmosphere of the room turning hostile in a split second. Code 1, she stammered out. James heard the keyword and froze from where he'd been about to stand up and storm off. What? He snapped, and then listened to himself and slumped back into his chair, a wave of confusion coming over him. What? He said again, softer. Code 1? Liz almost whimpered, sinking back into her seat. You... An orange dusty light whipped out from James's neck and back as the navigator living in his mind started to manifest, a feathered set of limbs pushing outward in a vague outline of a coat with a high collar and a wide eye set in that collar, mostly made of feathers. The ghostly tail it brought out wrapping around the chair James was sitting in. Something is trying to cut lines off your map, he bluntly informed James and Liz. Yeah, I feel that, James said, annoyed. There's a pressure when I think about... Stop that, the navigator hissed. Then, a second later, No, wait, do that again. James did so, not because he was asked, but because being told not to think about something is basically the same thing as being told to think about something, and he was already doing it. There was a quick hiss of orange light, and the rustling of feathers like a single great flap. James felt a pressure, like a melange of anger and shame, building in his chest, but with no direction to go. It quickly turned inward, leaving him feeling disgusted with himself, making thinking or focusing on anything a real challenge. There was a compulsion there to get away from this sensation, to do anything else, to think about anything else. The navigator squawked something incomprehensible. Not eldritch, just garbled language. A row of feathers along his flank burning away in a line like he'd just punched into something on fire, and then the pressure on James was gone. Ah! James gasped out. Thanks, he muttered, turning his arm over to examine the navigator's manifested feathers. Shit, are you okay? Did you kill it? I will live, the navigator said. And no, only tore a hole big enough for you, one, maybe two others. It's not smart or strong, it's just big. Well, thanks, James said. Do you need anything? Nap? Long drive to the coast? Yes. All right, I'll get on that soon, James promised. Then he looked back up at Liz, who was still watching him with apprehension, one of Planner's tentacles coiled protectively around her. Sorry, fuck, I'm really sorry, he said. I don't know why we didn't plan for security for this. That was stupid. Also, you're right. The dungeon thing was stupid. Tell teenagers not to do a thing and expect that to happen? What were we thinking? James berated himself. Damn it, we need to get someone to Utah and... He paused and looked down at his arm where the scorched feathers were already dissolving back into his skin. We need to get somebody with infomorph support down to Utah. Liz just gave him a slow nod. Are they going to be okay? she asked. If they are, they already are, James said with a sigh. Since they almost certainly went back into the dungeon, didn't they? He looked at her with a sad grin. You would, right? No, Liz protested, way too rapidly. Uh-huh. James's smile became a little more real. He pulled out his phone and started composing messages before realizing something. Damn it, I'm going to need to do this in person. They just won't react to the messages, will they? He sighed. Okay, hey, you want to call it here for now? That was kind of a horrible experience. I don't want to push it for you. Yes, Liz nodded. I can go bug Morgan or something, she said. James felt like he restrained himself very nicely against raising his eyebrows at her. Taunting the kids, even if he thought it was in good fun, was the opposite of the world that he wanted to build here. Oh, there was one other thing, from way at the start, Liz asked. I don't think it's that weird, but do you know someone named Frank? Used to, James nodded. I mean, I guess I still do, but I also used to. Why? Well, why is he in prison? Liz asked. Because it was an efficient way to remove his ability to hurt people, James stated, a harder tone creeping into his voice as he remembered that Frank had been selling people to one of the real monsters of Officium Mundi, trading lives for a few $1,000 here and there. Liz's mom among them. Yeah, it seemed nicer than killing him, James finished. Oh, okay. I just thought... never mind. Liz set the folder she was looking at back and let Planner help her up to her feet. I'm gonna go? Sure, but like, it's okay if you share your thoughts, you know? Pretend I'm not a stuffy adult if it helps, James joked. Liz shrugged, not really looking at him. I just thought you guys didn't like prisons, she said, before she said something James didn't really hear about doing this smarter next time and heading out of the room. Leaving James sitting at a desk covered in folders, staring at the far wall of the warehouse, not reacting to the delve team that came in to add their route up Winter's Climb to the growing map of the mountain. He sat there, staring down at his own hands for a few minutes, completely silent, until he looked up at the ceiling, considered screaming, and just said, well, fuck. Over a year of actually committing to the active process of restorative justice, working with people who had done way more damage than Frank ever had, and James had just fucking forgotten about the man. Not out of an anti-meme or hostile infomorph or anything he could excuse. He'd basically just ditched Frank in a cell somewhere, dusted his hands off, and called it problem solved. He waved off the delve team that was giving him concerned looks, assured them he was fine, and chatted with them a little bit while he put all the folders away. He actually didn't recognize any of them, except for Ethan, the overly excitable early 20s guy having gone through a tempering of sorts. He was still overly excitable, and still mostly early 20s, but his enthusiasm was a lot less self-centered and oblivious now. The others included a pair of human women who were doing the near-constant Skulljack Link thing, an authority that was on the cusp of maybe being a person, a Camerconda that was still bundled in a snake-shaped parka, and a laminated paper dragon, apparently named Elegant, that was the size of a horse and kept trying to eat James's coat as he talked. The dragon was the mount for the Camerconda when they escorted people up the mountain. Their team had been sort of ad hoc thrown together by Sarah and Karen, according to them at least, but it had grown over the last month into something reliable and effective, and they were preparing for a dedicated treasure hunt to look for more climb books in the near future and see if they could get high enough to unlock a second spell slot. The girls, who went by Marlia, a name James was certain was a portmanteau of something, asked if James had the power to get them more of the wood resistance programs, and he had told them he'd see what he could do, while in the back of his head wondering what the fuck research was doing with the massive server farm they kept expanding if people didn't already have wood resistance programs. It wasn't until he had already left with a vague idea of heading down to one of the basements to wrap up some loose ends that he remembered the glove and darted back into the cool warehouse to grab it off the desk. Already, his victory on doing something to it felt a little soured by the events afterward, but he couldn't help but be excited as he prompted the copied item to tell him what it could do. The first two abilities were as expected. Break wood, 5, shatter stone, 1, but then, beyond that, there was a third thing. something new, something that had worked, the way that he wanted it to for once, a magic power imbued into a different magic item, a different set of rules, and importantly, it told James what it was. At least, a little bit. Partially. It told him it was called Evoke Quill, level 1, no charges, 50 uses to level up, and a cooldown of half a day. He had no idea what it did, and yet, seeing that third line of information alongside the two familiar ones was an electric rush of satisfaction. Proof of concept. This worked. James had proven it worked, and that it could work, and now the door was open to more. To see where this new angle of magic could take them. Not just spells in items, but spells that grew in items. Eventually. After at least 50 days for this one. Maybe 40 days, if they really streamlined their time dilation exploitation. And even then, probably more days after. Spells on these things didn't seem to unlock anything until levels above 2 anyway. James thought about the brooch that purified food, and how it had recently unlocked the ability to bind itself to a processor, whatever that meant, and he gave a chuckling wince at the thought. That ability wouldn't be going anywhere for a decade, and so far it seemed to be a meta power with nothing to influence, making it about as useful as the gun bracelets when all they could do was tether themselves to a weapon every year or so. It was just very cool. And while he didn't have much of a need for a quill, evoked or otherwise, James was still generally excited to see where someone who was better at this, like Anesh or the Living Potion, B, could take the art of enchanting status quo items. For now, though, he was still feeling that lingering anxiety of hurrying up and waiting for JP or Nate or someone to report back to him and tell him where to go solve a problem. And so, instead of going home and going to bed like a normal person, James went back to looking for things to do to keep himself busy until he was well and truly exhausted. Halfway through waiting for the elevator, James's brain caught up to the fact that, while he might not be able to give specific orders about the Utah dungeon without an infomorph on hand to help, he absolutely had an easier way to contact the scout team than waiting to stumble into one of their members. Because he lived in the future and had a smartphone, and sending someone the sentence, "I need to talk to you, what's a good time to meet?" was something even the most finicky memeplex probably would have a hard time messing with. And if it would, then it was already too late for the order to save themselves anyway. So James sent the message, and then got on an elevator feeling a lot less overwhelmed. He'd been on an antidepressant that had been working for him for months now, but that didn't just make every problem his brain had magically go away. And sometimes he still ran into bouts of exhausting despair when he felt like he had more than one thing to do at a time and was foolishly trying to keep the whole picture of every problem at the front of his brain all at once. So it really was a big help to throw the ball into Charlie's side of the court and go back to just worrying about the big thing. The big thing, which was that a mysterious group of assassins were killing investment bankers and stockbrokers, and he couldn't do anything about it right now. The big thing, which was the thing he was trying to distract himself from. But he could distract himself from a single problem at a time. That was easier. The elevator let him out into the sunlit garden mezzanine of one of the basements. Cool sunset light that would have been normal to see upstairs maybe 3 hours ago, pouring through the skylight ceiling and onto the pair of trees growing through the center of the circular space. A balcony overhead had someone on it doing light pruning of one of the trees, while someone else worked at watering the ground cover plants with a set of mechanical arms on their serpent body. James nodded politely to the pair of gardeners as he walked past and headed for the hospital segment. It was still acting as a secure area, at least 2 rat roaches here under quarantine until they fully tested negative for anything hostile to human or their own lives. But James wasn't here to visit them just yet. That would be in the next week or 2. Instead, he was here to say hi to Alana's wasp friend, who actually had decided to start calling herself Banana, much to Alana's semi-exaggerated exasperation. "Now remember," the nurse on duty told James as she walked him back. "No sudden movements, don't raise your voice, and if you need assistance there's a call button over the bed and by the door that will alert either of us." She gave James an appraising look. "Be nice to the poor girl," she told him suspiciously. "Thank you," James said, as he set a hand on the room's door, deciding to just take the advice at face value rather than pleading his case. The nurse nodded at him. "Oh, and Deb would like me to tell you that she has the power to have you thrown into the ocean if you do anything overly dramatic again." She eyed James, looking for a reaction. The reaction she got was James turning slightly red and breaking eye contact. "Yes, I am... the ocean? Really?" "Well, she said the sea, but I assume she means the Pacific." "Good to know." James tried an awkward smile that was not returned. "I'll refrain this time. I'm just here to say hi." He disentangled himself from the prying gaze of the newly hired nurse, made a mental note that whoever had picked her out had done an excellent job finding somebody who so easily identified Banana as a young girl and a victim to be treated kindly, and not as a monster or something else. Also, finding somebody who could bully him around. That was a good trait for a nurse to have. The door he left cracked open, remembering that most of the rat roaches he had talked to down here got very nervous if they felt like he'd sealed them into the room. "Yellow." Banana buzzed the word at him with a warbling squawk through her open beak. She had been, according to Alana, struggling very hard to form words without Skulljack assistance, and she'd perked up as James came in, but then, as if remembering suddenly, shifted into a more reserved posture where she was sitting on the hospital bed and tried to peer around him. "Hey, Banana," James said softly, and then, with a sad twist to the smile, added, "Arush isn't with me today, it's just me." "'Kay," she cawed at him, and then, with the small wireless speaker paired to the Bluetooth she had her Skulljack connected to, added in more level English, "Is good. Scares me." "He's..." James suppressed the urge to get upset on Arush's behalf. Especially after the day he'd been having, he wasn't particularly interested in letting people be rude to the big rat roach behind his back. "You know he's not going to hurt you, right? He never would," James asked her quietly. "He's like you. Like a lot of people here." Banana cocked her head to the side and opened her beak again, the crack down its side still not healed properly. Perhaps never fully whole again. "Still scary," she intoned with a buzz. James sighed softly. "Well, we're all kind of scary, aren't we?" He smiled at her. "You been feeling better?" he asked more directly. The girl nodded, feathers on her head splaying as the antenna that flowed back from her skull bobbed along with the nod. "Yes," she squawked, adding with her digital voice, "less sleeping for me. Deb says..." Banana leaned forward, her breath wheezing out of her compressed lungs as she rustled her wings slightly. She kept them closed under her shell, though. "She teaches me about me. Soon we can try the thing." She looked at James with her single remaining eye. "And then..." "And then..." The digital words repeated and then trailed off. James settled into the chair by the side of the bed. "And then something different," he said happily. "But hopefully something good, right?" "Right," she cawed out loud. "I knew that Deb and Reed and company were making progress on the Shaper substance thing. I just didn't think we were ready to start person trials." He tapped at his chin. "You feel okay with it?" he asked her. The wasp girl just shrugged, the elytra that hid her wings rising and falling in a way that mostly just messed up the hospital gown she was wearing. "Maybe. I want to be an elephant." "I... what?" "Elephant." She tilted her head back and tried to emulate an elephant's trumpet. It didn't work. "I... okay." James clamped his lips shut, tried to keep the booming laugh from escaping his throat. "You like elephants?" he asked. Banana vigorously nodded, and then seemed to regret it almost instantly as she started drifting from side to side, her good eye going unfocused. She kept talking through her Skulljack, even under her self-inflicted daze. "They are a good mammal," she said. "Largest land mammal. Eat 300 pounds a day. Tusks made of ivory. Poaching is an existential problem." Banana stopped wobbling and looked at James with that glitteringly intelligent single eye, a sudden amount of focus that made him feel like he was being hunted. "When I am better, I will kill the poachers," she said calmly through her Skulljack. I do not know what kind of land mammal they are. There was a lot to unpack in that sentence, including the fact that somebody was going to have to talk to her about the ethics of murder sometime in the near future. But right now, James wasn't here to start a debate, especially with how tired she looked. You know a lot about elephants, he told her without trying to hide the pride in his voice. Banana gave him a sleepy nod, her eye already drifting closed as she leaned back into the pillows. A second later, she was unconscious again, and James waited a minute before he quietly rose and left, shutting the door behind himself. So, did someone give her an orb on elephant facts? James asked the nurse as he was passing by. Animal Planet, the nurse answered simply, looking up, but keeping the Skulljack link that she was doing something through on. Poor kid can't really leave, so she watches a lot of Animal Planet. Not sharks, though. They scare her. I should bring her the stuffed shark I have, James mused. No one can be afraid of sharks with that guy around. Check with Deb to make sure that doesn't fall under dramatic gestures first, the nurse wisely suggested as he left. Before he went, James requested and received a digital copy of the current Shaper substance research. Actually making use of the techno-organic marvel that was the skulljack he had in the back of his neck, he mentally flipped through the document on his phone as he wandered aimlessly through the research basement. There were two big barriers to safely using the Shaper substance: needed knowledge and pain. It was possible to just have an impression of how you wanted to change, and it would make that happen. But the more you knew about your own biology, and the more focused you could be, the faster it went. And speed was a factor, because you needed a lot of the substance to keep up the effect for longer periods of time, and also because of that second problem, the pain. Using the Shaper substance hurt. Not just what you were changing, though apparently that hurt more than anything else. Of the recorded testimonies from Sophons who had used it, 2 of them were from rat roaches, and so the pain couldn't exactly be balanced against human pain tolerance. But there were humans who had tried it, either in tiny microdose amounts as part of testing, or larger quantities because Nick was a fucking idiot sometimes. The pain was always described as the worst they had ever felt, which naturally made focus challenging. Nick was a bit of an outlier, but the small tests had been pretty conclusive. The more you knew about your own body, the faster you could make it work, and you could control the pain without lessening the effect. Of course, things that controlled that level of pain, like morphine, also had a negative impact on focus, which, according to the information from their resident rat roaches, was often far worse than simply living with whatever you were trying to fix. Sometimes it was lethal. Other times it was worse. James sighed as he entered the research communal pod and stole someone's empty chair. All the chairs were empty. It had gotten to be fairly late at night, and no one was here right now except a bunch of dozing shellaxies in the pen in the middle of the room. I don't know if I could do this, he said to himself. I'd love to have a better body, but this is a lot. He didn't quite say it to himself, though. There was a whisper of orange glow as his navigator wrapped around his collar. I could try it, the navigator stated. You have a body sometimes. That's an interesting thought. James considered kicking his feet up onto this person's desk and leaning back, but he settled for just tilting his head over the edge of the chair, hoping his back pain went away on its own. Do you want to change yourself? More than you already can. I cannot change myself, the navigator said. I am always the same, just sometimes I'm different, but different in the same ways. I am getting too tired, James stated, because I almost understood that. The navigator hummed at him. I will change in my way. You can try changing this way. James nodded, spinning the chair and idly reading from the big list of blue powers that were written on the whiteboard on the wall. That actually does remind me, though. Despite having your fruit name sniped out from under you, did you have anything you wanted to be called? Jiu Baji, the navigator answered instantly. James blinked a few times, the unfamiliar Chinese name taking him more than a few seconds to process as he stared at the writing on the wall with a blank look. Sorry, what? The navigator curled its feathered form up his neck, partially into his field of vision. Jiu Baji. I like what they are. They... Where did you even get that name? I don't think a single person working here right now has a Chinese name, though to be fair, I don't know everybody by name anymore, so what do I know? He trailed off. But also, what is that name? I stole it. The navigator, Zhu, now James supposed, announced. It is from a story. James raised his eyebrows and waited, silently prompting an explanation in his head. It is an old story, I think. Journey to the West. I am still learning it. And now James was more confused than ever. Wait, hang on, he said, arresting his ongoing slow spin of the office chair he was in. I haven't ever read that. I saw 10 minutes of the bad modern-day movie version of it when I was like 12, and then a much worse video game later on. How do you know it? I know all stories about traveling, or I can, Zhu told him smugly. I can see them out there and read them if I stretch. That is so cool. James instantly latched onto the concept of a personal thematic library drifting through the ether. Wait, so the two characters I know for sure through cultural osmosis are Monkey and Tripatarka? Which character is Zhu Baji? The pig, the navigator told James with a joyous tone to their manifested voice. James thought about that for a second, trying to remember anything he knew about Journey to the West, and then pursed his lips in consternation. Wait, no. I know this one. The pig demon, who constantly causes more problems for everyone. Yes, Zhu cheered, and sometimes fixes problems. He is perfect. If this were a book, this moment right now would be ominous foreshadowing, James pointed out. But then I can't really tell you to repress your nature. Please don't get me covered in soda again or anything. What? The navigator asked, their turn to be perplexed in this conversation. Long story, James said with a laugh. I'll tell you later. He looked up as somebody wandered into the space. Momo, hey, you busy? Yes, the girl answered instantly, like a liar. What's up? I just want to drop off a magic thing and talk to Reed or someone about it. Is anyone in? Do you know? She shrugged, tugging the midnight black bathrobe she was wearing tight around herself. I mean, most of them go home at night, she said. I think some of the engineers are in the design lab working on... We have a design lab? Yeah, dude. We have a bunch of different segmented spaces for work and testing, Momo told him. Ever since we started abusing orange totems, how often are you down here? I don't get out much, James admitted. Yeah, sure. Anyway, camera condor arms or something. Those guys basically don't sleep, I think. I think Chavoy actually literally has a purple that lets her turn energy drinks into naps or some bullshit. Momo sighed wistfully. If only I could be so irresponsible with my body, she mused. Deb finally put you on medical arrest for making red totems, huh? James smirked at her. No one can prove the brain damage was really happening, Momo accused the world itself of unfair behavior. James rolled his eyes. Except the MRI, he said. Anyway, you're nominally in charge of our magic department. Here. He tossed her the glove that he had enchanted, and then nudged a block of text through his skulljack and into his phone. I just sent you my observations and thoughts on it. Creation's a little different, but it works. Your initial hunch was right. Fuck yes, Momo grinned wolfishly. You know what I'm going to do? She demanded. No, because I'm tired, James said, voice coming out a little sharper than he meant. Momo paused and then looked at him with a worried expression. You okay? She asked. You look tired. James couldn't help but give a small laugh at that. I haven't been up for a while. I'm waiting on JP or Nate to contact me about the thing. Oh, can you convert energy drinks to naps? Momo asked. No. Then go the fuck to sleep, she suggested. If it's really important, they'll tell you tomorrow, or they'll wake you up. Or I can wait for Sarah to get here and mooch a nap off of her. Sarah doesn't come in on Mondays, Momo reminded him, rolling the long side of her hair around her knuckles and giving herself temporary curls. Even I know that. Why do I know that? James groaned, uninterested in figuring out the answer to that question. I'm going to bed, he announced. And then I'm driving to the coast tomorrow. Cool, Momo didn't bother to question him at all. Can I come? Sure. Good night. James slid out of the chair and stalked out of the room, leaving Momo to slip the glove onto her hand and start rummaging through drawers looking for a pen that wasn't magical. He'd had a long day, and as much as he felt like he needed to wait until something came up, the part of his brain that couldn't keep his eyes open any longer knew he was being an idiot. James needed to sleep. Momo was right. The problem would still be there for him tomorrow.